blown ashore, and so to Kumirmari. That day I heard for the first time of the events unfolding at Morijapi. The islands were close by, and in the school I was visiting there were many teachers who had witnessed the progress of the exodus. They had seen tens of thousands of settlers making their way to the island in boats, dinghies, and batbatis. Many of their own people had gone off to join the movement, drawn by the prospect of free land. But even as they marveled at the refugees' boldness, there were those who predicted trouble. The island belonged to the forest department, and the government would not allow the squatters to remain. I thought no more of it. It was no business of mine. At midday there was a meal, and shortly afterwards Horan and I set off to return to Lucibari. We were on the river heading home, when the wind suddenly started up. Within moments it was on us. It attacked with that peculiar, willful malevolence that causes people to think of these storms as something other than wholly natural. The river had been calm minutes before, but now we found ourselves picked up and shaken by huge waves. Before, Horan had been sweating to make the boat move. Now we were being swept along against our will. "Are we going to be finished off this time?" I said. "No, sir," he said. "I've lived through much worse than this." "When?" "In 1970, sir, during the Agumuka cyclone. If you had seen that, this would not seem like a storm at all. But that's too long a story to tell you now. What's important for us at this minute is to go ashore." He pointed to his right. "Morijapi, sir. We can take shelter there until the storm subsides." There was nothing more to be said. With the wind behind us, we were driven quickly to the shore. I helped Horan push his boat up the bank, and after he had secured it, he said, "Sir, we have to take shelter under a roof." "But where can we go, Horan?" "Over there, sir. I see a dwelling." Without another question, I set off after him, running through the pounding rain. With water streaming down my glasses, it was all I could do to keep my eyes on Horan's back. Soon we were at the door of a small shack of the usual kind, made with bamboo and palm leaf thatch. At the door, Horan shouted, "IGK Achish, who's there?" The door sprung open and I stepped in. I was standing there blinking, wiping the rain from my glasses when I heard someone say, "Sir, is that you?" I looked down and saw a young woman kneeling in front of me, touching my feet. That I could not identify her was no more a surprise than that she should know me. If you have been in one place long enough as a school teacher, then this happens with almost everyone you meet. Your pupils grow up and your memory fails to grow with them. Their new faces do not match the old. "Sir," she said, "it's Kusum." Of all the people I might have expected to meet in that place, she was surely the last. Impossible. Now that my glasses were dry, I noticed there was a small child hiding behind her. "And who is that?" I said. "That's my son, Fakir." I reached out to pat his head, but he darted away. "He's very shy," said Kusum with a laugh. I noticed now that Horan had not entered the dwelling, and I realized that this was probably as a show of respect to me. I was both pleased and annoyed. Who, after all, is so egalitarian as not to value the respect of another human being? Yet it seemed strange that he did not know of my aversion to servility. I put my head around the door and saw him outside, waiting patiently in the pouring rain. "What's the matter with you, Horan?" I said. "Come inside. This is no time to be standing on ceremony." So Horan came in, and there ensued a silence of the kind that often descends when people meet after a long time. "You," said Kusum at last, and Horan answered with one of his customary mumbles. Then she pushed the boy forward and said, "Here is Fakir, my son." Horan ran his hand through the boy's hair and said, "Besh, good." "What about your family?" she said. Your children must be quite grown now. My youngest is 5, said Horan, and the oldest is 14. She smiled as if to tease him. Almost of an age to be married then? No, said Horan with vehemence. I would not do to him what was done to me. I recount this only as an example of the way in which, even in extraordinary circumstances, people will often speak of the most inconsequential things. Look at you, I said. It's Kusum who's been away for all these years, and here we are talking about Horan and his children. There was a mat on the floor, and I sat down. I asked where she had been and how she had ended up in Morijapi. What can I tell you, sir? She said. It would take too long to tell you. The wind was howling outside, and the rain was still pouring down. There is nothing else to do anyway, I said, so I'm ready to hear whatever you have to say. She laughed. All right, sir. How can I say no to you? I'll tell you how it happened. I remember that her voice changed as she was recounting her story. It assumed new rhythms and distinctive cadences. Is it merely a trick of the memory? It doesn't matter. Her words came flooding back to me in a torrent. My pen will have to race to keep up. She is the muse, and I am just a scribe. Where was my mother? I only knew what I'd heard. From Lucy Barry I went as if to the dark. She had been taken, they said, to a town called Dhanabad. I asked a few questions and found out where to go. Switching from this train to that, I made my way there. At the station it struck me. What would I do now? It was a mining town. The air was filled with smoke. The people were strangers. I'd never known their like. Their words were like iron. They rang when they spoke. When their gaze turned on you, their eyes smoldered like coal. I was on my own, a girl dressed in a torn frock. I'd had no fear till then. Now my courage ran dry. But I was fortunate, although I didn't know. A blessed power was watching me. She showed me where to go. There was a man at the station selling gagne. I spoke to him and found he was from the Tide country. His house was in Basanti. His name was Rajan. His people were poor, and he had left home as a boy. He had been lamed in Calcutta by a speeding bus. Started selling food in stations and on trains. Chance had brought him to Dhanabad. There he'd found a shack. It was in a basti, right beside the rail track. When he heard why I was there, he said he would help. But in the meanwhile, what would I do with myself? Come with me, he said. You will be fine in my shack. Like you, I'm on my own. There will be room for us both. I followed him there, along the gravelled rail track. I was fearful when I entered. Would I be safe? All night I lay awake and listened to the trains. Many days passed, and he gave me no cause for shame. He was a good, kind man. How many such are there? It's true that some said, Look who's with Rajan the lame. I let them say what they wanted. What did I care? It was Rajan who brought me word of my mother. She was working in a place where truck drivers came to sleep on Chat Bay and buy women for the night. I went there with Rajan, and in secret we met. I fell upon Ma, but couldn't bring myself to speak. For so long I'd been waiting, but now my heart broke. Her body was wasted, her face thin and drawn. Don't look, Kusum, she said. Don't touch me with your eyes. Think of me as I was before your father died. I blame that Dilip. He's more demon than man. He said he'd find me work, and look where he brought me. To it leaves at home would have been a better fate. He sold me, that Donop, to others of his kind. This is no place for you, Kusum. You must go back, but stay a few days and come and see me once more. We went home that night and came back a week later. Then Rajan said something that stopped our very breath. Let Kusum marry me. Let her be my wife. She'll be with me forever. I'll give her my life. At last I saw Ma smile. What better news could there be? Fortunate Kusum, you've been blessed by Bon Bibi. You'll come too, said Rajan. Ma will steal you away. This is no place for you. You'll die if you stay. We went back together to Rajan's little shack. In Ma's presence, we were married, Rajan and I. Who could have known then that this would be Ma's bidai? To see me was her release. 3 months later, she died. That was her fate. Nothing could be done. If she had lived but 2 years, she would have seen Fokir, our son. Many months passed and we spoke of coming back here. That place was not home. There was nothing for us there. Walking on iron, we longed for the touch of mud. Encircled by rails, we dreamed of the ramming gull in flood. We dreamed of storm-tossed islands straining at their anchors and of the rivers that bound them in golden fetters. We thought of high tide and the Mohonas mounting, of islands submerged like underwater clouds. By night we remembered, we talked and we dreamed. By day coal and metal were the stuff of our lives. 4 years went by and then that life came to an end. A train began to move, with Rajan still unpaid. As the engine picked up speed, he ran to keep up. Then his bad leg crumpled and he made a misstep. He was pulled from the platform, thrown before the wheels. What can I say? He was taken before his time. He kept his word to me. He gave me his whole life. Never had I thought he would leave me like that, but at least I had Fokir. My son was his gift. Once again, I thought of making my way back home, but now with a child, I hadn't the courage on my own. Whom would I go to there? Whom would I ask for help? What if I couldn't make do and it came to the worst? What if I had to fall begging at Dilip's feet? Maybe Bon Bibi was keeping watch over me, for one night I heard tell of a great march to the east. They passed us next day, like ghosts covered in dust, strung out in a line, shuffling beside the rail tracks. They had children on their shoulders, bundles on their backs. Where were they heading? From what city had they come? They were not from those parts. They were strangers to us. I saw someone stumble, a woman as old as Ma. I took her back home with the help of some others. I gave them food and water. I saw they needed rest. Stay, sit, Rahul Beto, I said. Get back your strength. Did you notice the words? See, I'd spoken in Hindi, but it was in Bangla they spoke back to me. I was amazed. The very same words, the same tongue. Who are you? I said. Tell me, where are you headed? Listen, sister, we'll tell you. This is the story. Once we lived in Bangladesh, in Kulna Jila. We are tide country people from the Sundarbans edge. When the water broke out, our village was burned to ash. We crossed the border. There was nowhere else to go. We were met by the police and taken away. In buses they drove us to a settlement camp. We'd never seen such a place, such a dry emptiness. The earth was so red it seemed to be stained with blood. For those who lived there, the dust was as good as gold. They loved it just as we love our tide country mud. But no matter how we tried, we couldn't settle there. Rivers ran in our heads. The tides were in our blood. Our fathers had once answered Hamilton's call. They had wrested the state from the sway of the tides. What they'd done for another, couldn't we do for ourselves? There are many such islands in the Batir Dash. We sent some people ahead, and they found the right place. It's a large, empty island called Morijapi. For months, we prepared. We sold everything we owned, but the police fell on us the moment we moved. They swarmed on the trains. They put blocks on the road. but we still would not go back. We began to walk. I listened to them talk, and hope blossomed in my heart. These were my people. How could I stand apart? We shared the same tongue. We were joined in our bones. The dreams they had dreamt were no different from my own. They too had hankered for our tide country mud. They too had longed to watch the tide rise to full flood. If we stayed on in Danabad, what would our future be? A lifetime of toil in a city of rust? I gathered our things, put clothes on Fakir's back. With Rajan in our hearts, we stepped away from the shack. And there you have it, sir. I have told you the story. That's how Fakir and I came to Morijapi. And so we fell silent, each of us alone with our thoughts. Kusum and Fakir, Horan and I. In my mind's eye, I saw them walking, these thousands of people who wanted nothing more than to plunge their hands once again in our soft, yielding, tide country mud. I saw them coming, young and old, quick and halt, with their lives bundled on their heads, and knew it was of them the poet had spoken when he said, "Each slow turn of the world carries such disinherited ones to whom neither the past nor the future belongs."